Hello, I'm Dr. Jeevan Kharel, and today we are going to study the skull of cattle. The skull of cattle is broadly classified into two parts: the cranial bone and the facial bone. The cranial bone forms the cranial cavity, and the facial bone forms the facial structure. Okay, the facial bone, cranial bone consists of uh, bones like frontal bone. This is frontal bone. The frontal bones are two in number, which is clearly demarcated from other bone by the sutures. See, this is the demarcation between other bone. We can see a clear demarcation between a frontal bone and other bones. So this region is frontal bone. From here to here to here to here is a frontal bone. Okay, now frontal bone are two in number, 1 and 2, left and right. It consists of supraoccipital foramen and supraoccipital groove. This is frontal suture which separates between left and right frontal bone, and this is a bony projection which is teres frontalis, and this is cornual process. The cornual process communicates with the frontal sinus when present just beneath the frontal bone. This is all about frontal bone. Now let's study about the nasal bone. Nasal bones are also two in number, 1 and 2. Second one is missing. Okay, it is clearly demarcated from the frontal bone by the suture, and between lacrimal and nasal bone by this suture, and nasal and maxilla by this suture. So there is a clear demarcation between nasal and other bones too. Now let's study about the malar bone, lacrimal bone. This is lacrimal bone which is clearly demarcated from other bones between frontal and lacrimal, nasal and lacrimal, maxillar and lacrimal, zygomatic and lacrimal. These are also two in number. Now let's study about the zygomatic or malar bone. Zygomatic or malar bone are also two in number, which is clearly demarcated from other bones, like by the suture, lacrimal and zygomatic, maxilla and zygomatic by this suture. And zygomatic this is the body of the malar bone, and this is the temporal process of zygomatic bone, and this is the frontal process of zygomatic bone. Here we can see the eye orbit. The eye orbit is formed by the frontal bone, lacrimal bone, and this is malar bone. In lacrimal bone, we can see the lacrimal sac or fossa is here. Sac or fossa is used to lodge here. From here it is used to communicate with the nasal cavity through nasolacrimal duct. This was about the zygomatic or malar bone. Now let's study about the malar bone. Malar bone is clearly demarcated from the zygomatic, lacrimal and nasal bone by this suture line. Also with premaxilla by this suture. Ventrally, maxilla is completely demarcated, clearly demarcated from the palatine bone by this suture, and also from the premaxilla by this suture. Hence, the maxilla consists of infraorbital foramen from which fifth cranial nerve passes, and it consists of facial tuberosity. This is facial tuberosity, and this is facial crest. Generally, the infraorbital foramen is present. Infraorbital foramen is present just above the first premolar bone. Ventrally, we can see this is the palatine process of maxilla, and we can see alveolar socket where premolar and molar bone gets lodged. Now let's study about the premaxilla bone. It is also clearly demarcated from the maxilla by this suture. Okay, it consists of nasal process of premaxilla, palatine process of premaxilla, palatine fissure, and interincisive fissure. Okay, this was about the premaxilla. Now we will study about the uh, occipital bone. Occipital bone is broadly classified into three parts: on the squamous part or superior occipital. This part from here to here is clearly demarcated from the parietal and interparietal bone by this line. And the supraoccipital bone consists of occipital protuberance, which gives the attachment to the nuchal ligament or ligamentum nuchae. Okay, occipital bone consists of superior occipital, this part, lateral mass, and basioccipital. The lateral mass is consists of the very large foramen or the largest foramen, which gives passage to the spinal cord. This is foramen magnum. The foramen magnum consists of hypoglossal foramen, which gives the passage of the 12th cranial nerve, and condyloid foramen. On either side of the foramen magnum, we can see occipital condyle, which are two in number, and it articulates with the atlas of vertebra, first atlas of the vertebra. On either side of the occipital condyle, we can see condyloid fossa, and on either side of the condyloid fossa we can see paramastoid process. Hence, the lateral mass consists of foramen magnum, occipital condyle, condyloid fossa, and paramastoid process. Now the last one is basioccipital. Here we can see this is basioccipital, which forms the floor of the cranial cavity. Just beneath the basioccipital, we can see basilar tubercle. These two are basilar tubercle with basilar tubercle, and this part is the posterior sphenoid. On the interior part, is presphenoid. This is presphenoid, and this is also presphenoid. This is postsphenoid. So, and this is the wings of sphenoid, which consist of foramen ovale. This is foramen ovale. This is foramen rotundum, and this is optic foramen, and this is sphenoid foramen. So there are four foramen: foramen ovale, foramen rotundum, optic foramen, and sphenoid foramen are in series. And this was about the sphenoid bone. Now let's study about the palatine bone. Palatine bone consists of two parts: the horizontal part and the perpendicular part. The horizontal part consists of anterior or superior palatine foramen, and here you can see posterior palatine foramen. This is horizontal palatine bone. Now the perpendicular part of the palatine bone is clearly demarcated from the pterygoid bone by this suture. This is pterygoid bone, and this is perpendicular part of palatine bone. Okay, this is pterygoid bone. Now one more structure we can see in between these two bones is vomer bone. This is a vomer bone which forms the which reaches to the entire nasal cavity and helps to form the nasal septum. Okay, now let's study about the palatine bone. Sorry, parietal bone. The parietal bone is clearly demarcated from the frontal bone. Frontal bone by this by a suture line here. This is parietal bone, and it is clearly demarcated also from the temporal bone by this suture line. So this is parietal bone. It passes posteriorly also up to here, and the interparietal bone get fused in large animals, but it is not clearly seen. Two separate bones cannot be seen, but this is interparietal bone. Two separate interparietal bones cannot be seen due to fusion of interparietal bone. So this is interparietal bone, and this is parietal bone. This is the vertical part of the parietal bone, and this is horizontal part of the parietal bone. The region below the parietal bone is temporal bone. This is temporal bone, which is clearly demarcated. It consists of two part, squamous part. This all is squamous part, and this is this is uh, petrous part. Okay, let's study about the squamous part of the temporal bone. Squamous part of the temporal bone consists of the body. This is the body, and this is temporal zygomatic process of temporal bone. This is zygomatic process of temporal bone. This is the body of squamous part of temporal bone. Okay, now let's study about the uh, petrous part of the temporal bone. This is external auditory meatus. We can't see internal auditory meatus right now. This is paramastoid foramen. This is hyoid process. This is tympanic bulla, and this is postglenoid foramen. This is postglenoid foramen. Once again, external auditory meatus, tympanic bulla, hyoid process, postglenoid foramen, and this is paramastoid foramen. Let's see in another angle. This is hence the petrous part of temporal bone consists of tympanic bulla, hyoid process, tympanic bulla, hyoid process, paramastoid foramen, external auditory meatus, and postglenoid foramen. This is glenoid cavity. This is the part of the petrous part of temporal bone. Now, one thing I missed during the process is foramen of jugular foramen or foramen of lacerum, which gives the passage to the jugular vein. Now, this large depression here we can see, this is large depression which is called temporal fossa, which is formed by the parietal bone and temporal bone. One more structure we can see here is mastoid foramen, which is mastoid foramen. So we have studied about the frontal bone, temporal bone, parietal bone, interparietal, occipital, sphenoid bone. Okay, now let's study about the nasal turbinates. Here we can see this is a nasal turbinates. This is dorsal nasal turbinates, and this is ventral nasal turbinates. This turbinates is divided into two by the nasal septum. Here it was a cartilaginous septum, but here we can see the osseous septum. Osseous septum is formed by the perpendicular part of the ethmoid bone and the vomer bone. This is vomer bone, part of vomer bone, which I have shown you, and this is the perpendicular part of the ethmoid bone. Actually, ethmoid bone is present right in the between of cranial cavity and the nasal cavity, which separates. It also contains of cribriform plate, where it gives passage to the olfactory knobs. Okay, now the in between dorsal and ventral and middle nasal turbinates, Middle turbinates is present just back of this dorsal and ventral turbinates. Okay, the space between these three turbinates is called meatus, like dorsal, ventral, and middle meatus. This was about the nasal turbinates. Okay, I think I have covered almost everything. So for revision, let's do a quick revision of the cranial bones. Frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal bone. Here we can see occipital bone, uh, sphenoid bone here, sphenoid bone, and this is palatine bone, this is thyroid bone, this is palatine bone, this is maxilla, this is premaxilla. Okay, what we can see is this is bomber, this is bomber. Okay, we can see ethmoid bone, which is present just in the middle of cranial cavity and nasal cavity. That's all about the uh, skull of cattle. I will thank you everyone for your patience. Thank you everyone. Bye bye. Have a great day.